at Fort Hamilton to build a major platform, and General Higgins had to get up in front of the entire assembled 1st U.S. Army and apologize to the women that he had insulted in his deposition, right? And Jack Weinstein signs this order, right? And so we end up go back home. Of course, then the word comes down to the law firm, that I've been involved in this particular case.
They don't like that.
And so anyway, that the Court of Appeals reversed the part about him having to put up the bandstand.
Oh, he didn't have to do that.
But he had to post. He had to post in conspicuous places throughout the grounds. He apologized to them. But the bottom line is, it was cases like that I was doing in the other halftime. But the other halftime, I was doing stuff for the New York Times and NBC. Yeah. And so the bottom line is, I left and went to Bailey's office instead, and right directly to Bailey's office in Boston.
To bring this back, F. Lee Bailey, as you said, called you on like June 21st, shortly after the Watergate break-in.
Yes.
Now, Watergate is another case that obviously at the time was covered extensively. It's constantly cited in basic parlance when we discuss things politically.
Yeah.
But the details and the timeline of the case and how it played out is often totally forgotten about the history. So can you just walk people through exactly what happened here?
Sure. Now, it's interesting because these cases were all kinds of things that are so real to me, and it must be for like a lot of the young kids. It must be like the American Civil War. The Civil War, the American Revolution. They're all kind of back in there.
I didn't say you were that old, Dan.
There's Watergate back in there. But so what happens is Richard Nixon. Remember, Richard Nixon in 1960 was the vice president under Eisenhower.
That's right.
He'd become the Republican nominee for the presidential nomination in 1960. He lost the election to John Kennedy.
Right.
John Kennedy came in and went through that entire era. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963. Yep. And Lyndon Johnson becomes president. And Lyndon Johnson then runs in 1964, in November of 1964, and is elected for his first term. It goes all the way to 1968. Lyndon Johnson has cranked up the Vietnam War. He's engaged in massive war crimes against the people of Southeast Asia. People are in the streets rioting against him here in the country. The bottom line is 1968, there's this election getting ready to take place, and it was going to be Lyndon Johnson against Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was going to come back and run against him. And then we were trying to. I was at Harvard Law School by that time, and there were a bunch of us that were trying to get Bobby Kennedy to run against Johnson for the Democratic nomination. Bobby wouldn't run against an incumbent like that. A number of my professors were working with him in his campaign. Anyway, the bottom line is, Bobby just finally said he wasn't going to do it. So we had Joe Grandmaison and Gary Hart went and met with Gene McCarthy, the senator from Minnesota, to have him run against Lyndon Johnson. And in the first primary up in New Hampshire in January of 1968, Senator McCarthy, almost beat Lyndon Johnson. The opposition to Johnson was so intense. And Johnson comes out and announces that he's decided he's not going to run. Bobby comes out right away and says then he's going to run. Yeah. And so Bobby starts campaigning for the campaign in 1968. And then in April of 68, Martin Luther King is killed. Then the day of our first exam, of our final exam at Harvard Law School, June 13th of 1968, Bobby is shot and killed in Los Angeles. Spends a whole day lingering before he dies. But right. And so then this horrific demonstration takes place at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where the Senator Humphrey who was the vice president under Lyndon Johnson, was going to ascend to be the candidate for the Democratic Party. In the tens of thousands of young Americans gathered in Chicago and laid siege to the convention.
They laid siege.
They did. They encircled the entire place. There were tens of thousands
with
of the
weapons
people.
and stuff?
No. There was no weapons. They just
say siege, Danny. I started thinking weapons.
No, they were just marching around and opposing them and chanting and everything. And the Chicago police were turned loose on them by Mayor Daley. And they just had a police riot, and it was officially found, as a matter of fact, that the police had just rioted and attacked the demonstrators, and it was mayhem at the convention. And Richard Nixon ends up winning in the presidential campaign against Hubert Humphrey by No. He ended up winning by less than 1%.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Landslide.
No. That was in 72
that's
against
right.
McCarthy or against McGovern.
Yeah.
No. This was a super tight race, even against Hubert Humphrey.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, very important piece. So he just wins by a hair's breadth and comes in and is super unpopular. Because he's such an arch reactionary, and everybody who's opposed to the Vietnam War hates him, and so that it was a very unpopular presidency.
Quick question on
yes.
that. I'm just curious because it does technically change parties at that point.
Yeah.
You had said this earlier, how some of the attitudes on like Vietnam and on different wars, obviously past president to president. I think we saw that again with Bush to Obama to Biden, even to Trump to an extent. And, at that time, why did Nixon take on the stance that was so, I might be cherry picking here to say this, but so similar to Johnson? Was it simply like Intel walked in the office day one and said, "Look, sir, you're going to have to do this," or did he actually believe we needed to be there?
Well, he was. You got to understand, it was back in 1954 that we originally went in to take over from the French after Dien Bien Phu. He was the vice president in 1954 under Eisenhower. And he ran the 54-12 committee, which ran all covert operations and stuff. So he was intimately involved in the CIA operations in Vietnam. So he was one of the original architects of the whole insurgency operation that was going on in Vietnam. So when he came into office in 1968, even though it was 8 years later, he had been one of the major instigators of the whole war in Vietnam. So he was in full-throated support of this whole operation.
But he didn't you know how politicians, they change their opinion with the wind based on where it's blowing. He didn't change his opinion at all, despite all that?
He just kept hammering down more and more and more.
We're going to go in there and rain down hell on him.
Just like with Johnson, and ended up, bombing into Cambodia and doing the Tet, the response to the Tet offensive, all that, all of that horrible stuff was going on, and the people were rising up. The young people were all rising up against Nixon in 1972. And so there was a huge insurrection still going on, and there were the hardcore right-wing people that were clamping down on all the Vietnam protesters, et cetera. And there was a kind of an air of potential civil war sort of in the air at the time.
Interesting.
And the problem is that the candidate that was selected by the Democratic Party in 1972 was George McGovern. George McGovern was a sweet South Dakota, very progressive senator, and was very articulate against the war, and was carrying the banner against the war. But nobody thought that he had a real chance to be able to beat Richard Nixon, except that all of a sudden this weird thing that they're in the midst of the campaign. They have 1972 in June. They have the conventions. Nixon gets the nomination. McGovern gets the nomination. They're going through the whole motions, and then all of a sudden this weird thing happens. Nixon's kind of on the roll, heading into being assumed to be elected president. All of a sudden, this Watergate break-in happens. And word goes out that there had been this peculiar event has taken place, that these four Cubano guys and an American CIA person had been arrested in the Watergate Hotel. They had burglarized the Watergate Hotel, which was the head of the Democratic National Committee headquarters there, and nobody could figure out what exactly was going on. And there was a little bit of a flurry of news stories about it going on. But we were into June now, so there was just the July, August, September, campaigns rolled on. The election comes down, and in November, Nixon ends up winning in a huge landslide. Wins all but like 2 states. I think it was Massachusetts and California. The only
Sounds
ones
right.
that voted for McGovern. And the bottom line is he comes into office and immediately starts slamming down on Vietnam, doing all the same stuff he was doing. But then these 2 young reporters on the Washington Post start digging back into the story. I was brought on by Bailey to work on the case.
But he had called you way back when it happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up coming down there later in the fall and started investigating it. I was saying, now, what the hell is going on here? I said, that by that time, the Washington Post had started having a number of stories about it.
And this is fall of 72.
This is the fall of 72.
Okay.
And that they then brought in a special select committee in the House and Senate on Watergate to investigate what was going on, because they were starting to reveal things in the Washington Post about the connections between the people that were in the Watergate Hotel and the president's office. Okay, so at that time, people weren't paying a lot of it. It was like kind of stuff going on sort of in the background. But when I got involved in it, I started saying, I need to find out what happened here. If I'm being asked to participate in this, I need to find out what happened. What in the world are 3 of these Traficante gunmen doing in the Watergate Hotel? What has that got to do with anything? And I started investigating it and found out that Bailey was the attorney for Santos Traficante. And so I said, oh, look, Traficante obviously must know what his guys are doing in there. So let's find out what's going on. So we have Bad Andy Tunney, who was our chief investigator. That he was the head of a thing called Moriarty and Associates. It's got 40 Class A licensed private investigators that are at our disposal at the Bailey firm, right? And he goes and sits down. He goes down to who was it? Down in Tampa.
Tampa, yeah.
Over in Tampa, and over in Chuck Gonzalez. Henry Gonzalez, Hank Gonzalez. Hank Gonzalez's office brings in Traficante and brings him over to Hank Gonzalez's house.
And this is when he's the Don.
Yeah, he's the Don. He's the Don of Havana. He's up in Tampa because he's fled back in January '59 when Batista was overthrown.
Yeah.
So he's up there. So that they bring him over to Hank Gonzalez's house, and Bad Andy spends the weekend with him, interviewing him in the guest house, and gets the story about what's happened here. And he ends up telling us that what's happened. And what we discovered is that the reason that, in fact, it had been Nixon himself that had personally ordered them to go into the Watergate Hotel. It wasn't just a brain fart or something on the part of the plumbers unit. That this was actually ordered by Nixon himself.
He's telling you.
Yeah, this is Traficante is being very clear about this. That this was ordered by Nixon himself, because Nixon was terrified that the Larry O'Brien. Lawrence O'Brien had just been made the new head of the Democratic National Committee that June, and was going to be supervising the campaign against Nixon. And it turns out that Larry O'Brien, prior to being made the head of the Democratic National Committee, was the 20-year chief lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for Howard Hughes.
Oh, shit.
And it turns out that Howard Hughes is the guy back in 1960
Yep.
when Richard Nixon was the vice president under Eisenhower, and realized that he was going to be the nominee for the Republican Party for the presidential nomination in 1960 against John Kennedy. He reached out and contacted Howard Hughes, excuse me, who was a secret consultant to the National Security Council of the Eisenhower-Nixon administration. He was responsible for like designing the Glomar Explorer, which was this special ocean-going ship that had the capacity to reach down to the bottom of the seafloor and pick up submarines. So in case a Soviet submarine had become disabled and incapacitated, that we would be able to go recover it and recover the technology that's in the submarine, et cetera. He had also done the Spruce Goose, which was the prototype to the C-5A cargo plane. He set up a thing called the Summa Corporation, that was a corporation where they did covert technical work for the CIA and NSA. Anyway, he was a contractor, a secret contractor. There were a few other programs he was involved in. It won't help to talk about. But the bottom line is that Nixon reached out to him on the secure phone from the 5412 committee, which is the section of the National Security Act of 1947 that ostensibly authorizes them to engage in other activities from time to time at the behest of the president. And they deemed that as being the source of their authority to engage in covert operations, what they call kinetic action.
Yeah.
And so that Nixon reached out on the secure phone to talk to Howard Hughes, asking him to set up a political assassination team to kill Fidel Castro
in 1960.
June.
While he's vice president.
Well, he's vice president, right? And so he asked that be set up, and that Howard Hughes takes steps to keep it away from the White House so that it doesn't get tracked back to the White House. So Howard Hughes doesn't agree or disagree in the telephone call, according to Traficante, but he ends up hanging up, and then he calls in Bob Mayhew, one of his lawyers, and says to Mayhew, here, you take this. Nixon's getting set to be president now. He wants to have this assassination team put together to kill Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and these other 5 comandantes that are the head of the new revolutionary government in Cuba. And so we want to keep this away from the White House. So Bob Mayhew reaches out to Johnny Roselli. Johnny Roselli is there in Las Vegas where Howard Hughes was. Yep. Howard Hughes was at I think it was the Sands Hotel in the penthouse there. That was one of the 2 mob casinos.
I actually just had a guy in, Tom Meyer, for episode 236, who just wrote a book, Mafia Spies, that became a docuseries as well, all about this. It's pretty wild history.
Oh, far out.
Yeah.
That's way cool.
Yeah.
All right. So the bottom line is that Bob Mayhew reaches out to Johnny Roselli, who was the bagman there in Vegas for Sam Giancana, who was the Don of the Mafia in Chicago, and Mayhew reaches out to Johnny Roselli, and he says, Roselli, look, why don't you guys, the mob, you have your own reasons for wanting to get rid of Castro. He's closed down your gambling casinos. He's closed down the whorehouses. He's shut off the heroin supply that's coming through with Batista, that was being used to help fund covert operations, et cetera. That you guys have got your own reasons for wanting to get rid of them. Why don't you guys put together a team to get rid of them? And Johnny Roselli says, well, I'd have to clear this with Giancana. I can't just do something like that. And so Johnny Roselli goes back to Chicago, meets with Sam Giancana. Giancana says, wait a second, you're talking about knocking off Castro, in Guevara, that we're going to have to clear that with Santos Traficante. Traficante's the Don of Havana. Even though he's fled and he's up in Tampa right now, he's still the Don down there.
It's on the commission.
So we have to talk with him. So they fly down in late June of 1960, and they have 3 meetings with Traficante at the Fontainebleau Hotel. And in the third meeting, Traficante ends up saying, I agree in principle to do this, but I have to make sure that this isn't some kind of a brain fart, of Howard Hughes or Mayhew or any of these guys. I got to make sure that Nixon is the guy that's ordering this because we need that kind of cover.
Right.
If we're going to do this. And so the next meeting, they have a short meeting, and a guy comes to the meeting using the nom de guerre, Mr. Ed, and it's Sheffield Edwards, who is the chief of security of the Central Intelligence Agency under Richard Nixon, who has the 5412 committee that handles covert operations out of the National Security Council, right? So he greenlights this operation. And Santos Traficante then picks 15 guys that are his former gunmen from Havana, who have been recruited. He wants to make sure that all the guys that he recruits into this S-Force, he's called, that are people that are working with the Central Intelligence Agency now in a thing called Operation 40. Operation 40 was this covert operation that was being mounted out of 5 paramilitary bases that had been established all through the southeastern United States. One on Swan Island, one on No Name Key, one in the Everglades, and then 2 of them at Lake Pontchartrain over in Louisiana.
Yep.
Anyway, they're all set up, and they've got CIA liaison people functioning to them, but they're made up of a lot of the anti-Castro, pro-Batista, right-wing Cuban organized crime guys that were working with Traficante in all the different gambling casinos and houses of prostitution and heroin trafficking they had going through Havana under Batista. And so these guys are all operatives now working with the Central Intelligence Agency in a thing called Operation 40. And then comes the election time after setting all this up in June. And they set up a scheme for financing the training of this S-Force, that they were taking a skim off the casinos, off the 2 major mob casinos. I think one is the Flamingo and one's the Sands. And they were skimming cash off of them, and they were putting them in these brand new expensive suitcases and putting them in the trunks of Cadillac automobiles, and then driving them down from Las Vegas through New Orleans, where Marcella would do the audit on what the cash was that was coming off the skim. Then they would pack them back up, and they'd take them into Miami, and they'd put them in the Miami National Bank of Meyer Lansky, the bank down there. And then what they would do is they would wire some of that money down to a bank account down in the Banco Internacional in Mexico City. And they would put this cash into this bank account of a lawyer by the name of Ogario, his name was, Manuel Ogario. And they put the money in there, and that money was used to finance the training that was taking place of this triangular fire team base that was down in Oaxaca, Mexico, on the ranch of Clint Murchison Jr.
Who was he?
Clint Murchison is the son of Clint Murchison Sr., who owned the Dallas Texans football team out of Houston, Texas. And they were very wealthy guys, businessmen down there, oil men and stuff down there.
Oh, yeah. Wait. You mean the Houston Texans?
Yes. No,
right.
yes. Well, they were originally the Texans, Houston Texans.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. What was McLean? What's the name of that family again? The owner died a couple years ago.
I don't know who that is.
I'll look it up.
But anyway, it was Clint Murchison that owned them. And the bottom line is that Clint Murchison Jr. had this ranch down in Oaxaca, Mexico. And on that ranch, they were training these triangular fire team people. And what they did is they recruited, the Traficante recruited them up out of those 5 paramilitary bases where they were running covert operations against Cuba in Operation 40. So, and he would send like a private plane to pick them up, fly them to Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And then they would sign in there and then disappear. And nobody knew where they were going. But it turns out that they were being secretly brought down to this triangular fire team training base down in Oaxaca, Mexico, and trained there. And the guy that was training them was a guy named Carl Jenkins. Carl was a former United States Marine Corps guy that got recruited into the Army Special Forces when it started going, and he trained them down there in that. And so all of that operation was underway when Richard Nixon ends up not getting elected in November. And to everyone's surprise, Kennedy wins. That's all still really strange and weird and very close race, and all the stuff in Chicago and all that Boss Daley and all that Sam Giancana stuff goes on. So the bottom line is Kennedy becomes president. They then confront Kennedy with the fact that there's this covert plan underway to launch a military assault against the island of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. He tells them that he absolutely refuses to provide any kind of air cover, prohibits any kind of U.S. military intervention to support them. If, in fact, the CIA is telling him the truth and that people will rise up in Cuba behind any just group coming in, landing on the beach, then let him do it. But he's not going to give him any air support or any kind of military support.
Which to this day, many Cubans view him like as a traitor just for saying that.
Except that the real gripe they had was later with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It wasn't this thing.
Really?
Because he was very clear from the very beginning that he wasn't going to provide air cover. It wasn't that he withdrew the air cover or did any of that stuff. That's all.
But they try to rewrite that as history. They tried. He withdrew it.
But the bottom line is that he refused to do it. And what they did is they put the guys ashore. What they screwed up. They had some I think they were B-26s or something, old war surplus ones, and they had them based down in Nicaragua under Somoza, and that they were scheduled to fly in to provide air cover for them. It wasn't the United States, but it was old B-26s, and they were in a different time zone. And they actually arrived an hour late during the invasion. How that happens. Yeah, I hate how that happens. I mean, it just out of history, as it turns out, they got there an hour late, and the guys were already, beaten flat on the beach. They'd sunk their ammo ship. They were trapped on the beach. It was too late for them to be able to do anything. They turned around and fled. Bottom line is that whole fiasco comes down. Kennedy turns around and publicly takes responsibility for it, tells Khrushchev that he apologizes for them doing this. He's going to shut down Operation 40, gives his word to Khrushchev that he's going to shut down Operation 40. He goes down to the Orange Bowl down in Miami and convenes all of the hardcore right-wing anti-Castro Cuban community there at the Orange Bowl and apologizes to them publicly. Yeah. He does this and swears to them that a free flag of Cuba will be flying over the island by the end of his second term. And so he kind of gets them to kind of acquiesce to that. And the word really went out that, that he hadn't really betrayed them. It's just that he'd always refused that he was going to provide the air cover. So the bottom line is that goes on. And then all of a sudden, Nikita Khrushchev realizes that Kennedy had lied to them, that they weren't shutting down Operation 40. They just changed the code name. They changed it to Operation Mongoose. They set up a big airplane hangar on the campus of the University of Miami called JM Wave, and they were running the operation there. They brought in Theodore Shackley out of Berlin, who was the deputy to Reinhard Gehlen, the head of the Waffen-SS, anti-communist Third Reich intelligence, and brought him in to run the Miami station. And they continued the operation, and they never told the Kennedys about the existence of this assassination team that was functioning. In the assassination team, we've all heard stories about them, the lengths to which they went to try to assassinate Fidel Castro and Raul Castro, etc.
How did they not get those guys? The number of things they did, like those dudes just wouldn't die.
Well, because I mean, you got to understand when something that is masquerading as a democratic supportive group that's going to try to support a democratic uprising on this imprisoned island. When they drink their own Kool-Aid and they believe that,
Right.
and it's completely inconsistent with reality. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Batista was horribly unpopular in Cuba, and Castro was extraordinarily popular. He was very, very pro-democratic to begin with. He wanted to have a regime that was extremely friendly to the United States. The reality is that Richard Nixon confronted him as the head of the 5412 committee and said, "Look, if you're January of '59, you've overthrown Batista, you're in power now. We want to set up a deal that you just don't have any relations at all with Russia or China. Don't have any kind of diplomatic relations with them because this is the Monroe Doctrine. We're in charge of the whole Western Hemisphere. We're to have no foreign influences in here. You can have no foreign relations with these people." And Castro tells them to piss off. That he'll have relations with whoever he chooses. And Richard Nixon says, if you do that, we're going to end up basically mounting covert operations against you, which they did, and try to destabilize their government, burning their sugar fields, blowing up bridges, basically waging kind of an economic war, against Cuba to try to be able to convince people to see these people are not supportive of American industry and business. They've shut down the tourist trade, i.e. the casinos down there.
It's a PR campaign,
and
too. Yeah.
So the bottom line is that whole operation continues apace. But now Nikita Khrushchev knows that he was lied to, and so he starts sending in missiles, starts putting in the missiles into Cuba. And so by October of 1962, they've discovered that Russian missiles are being put up down in Cuba, and the whole Cuban Missile Crisis comes down. And the bottom line is that we can go into graphic detail about that because it's an extraordinarily important point in history that we came within 2 minutes. The doomsday clock that the atomic scientists have set at the Bulletin of Atomic Science, was lowered to 2 minutes during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the fact is, they came within minutes of launching a full nuclear war. Curtis LeMay, who was the chief of staff of the United States Air Force, was this hardcore right-wing guy that really thought that we should have a nuclear war with Russia when we had a distinct advantage over them missile-wise.
They thought 240 to 60 was a win.
That's right.
Sick way of thinking.
Yep. So the bottom line is that we came within a couple of minutes of a total thermonuclear exchange at that point, and both Kennedy and Khrushchev were so incredibly traumatized by that Kennedy ordered them to shut down the whole covert operations, shut down Operation Mongoose, ordered them to stand down, to shut down the paramilitary bases down there. That was viewed as betrayal because he had given his solemn word in the Orange Bowl that he would, in fact, have the free flag of Cuba flying over the island.
Didn't he also, like, he and Khrushchev had these 18 calls that were off the record or whatever, and they agreed that they were going to shut down actual warheads?
They were going to start disassembling, each respectively, they were going to start disassembling the warheads of their respective nuclear arsenals. And that's what got him killed. The China lobby in the United States, very much grounded in Brown Brothers Harriman and that whole crowd.
China lobby?
There's a group that they called the China lobby that believed that they were the ones that wanted to back at Brown Brothers Harriman. They wanted to finance the rise of Germany to be the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. And they would control the controlling stock in all those corporations in the military of there. And then the United States would be able to turn all of its attention westward to develop the markets in Asia. And they realized that China was going to be their major adversary. And they realized that they couldn't take on China in a traditional land war because China can put 1 billion men in uniform. They realized that at Incheon. In North Korea, they realized that at the reservoir, the Chinese put in like 100,000 men and just swarmed the NATO forces, the U.S. forces, and drove them all back. And that's how they pushed how they ended the Korean War. Is the Chinese sent a huge wave of uniformed men across the border into North Korea. and pushed the Allied forces all the way down to the 42nd parallel, so that they took up root in South Korea. But that's how that happened. And so the China lobby, who had been Brown Brothers Harriman, that had been choreographing, kind of setting up the Germany as the power astride all of Europe to protect Western capitalism and the business community that they'd invested in all these war industries and stuff there, that they would develop the resources of Asia. That the Vietnam invasion was all part of that. The whole Korean War thing was part of that. Was try to establish a land base in Asia. Okay, so they had this entire group called the China Lobby, and that's Claire Booth Luce and Henry Luce and Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles and William D. Pauley. There's a whole bunch of these people that were involved in all of that, but that's that China Lobby group, and they realized that they had to maintain the nuclear weapons, so that no matter how much the Soviet Union agreed to get rid of all their nuclear weapons, and no matter how much China was willing to agree not to have any nuclear weapons, the United States unilaterally insisted upon maintaining its military nuclear arsenal, because they would have it available to deploy against China in the future. They were thinking long range on this. So the bottom line is that when, in fact, Dulles and the people realized that Kennedy and Khrushchev had this backdoor channel going with their 18 letters, actually, that were being communicated back and forth, Norman Cousins was carrying these letters back and forth, and they were getting set to start to disassemble the warheads, respectively, and John 23rd, Pope John the 23rd, was going to be the broker for this deal.
Oh, they had the Pope in the middle of it.
Yeah, they had the Pope
First
in the middle
Catholic president put the Pope in the middle of it.
Yeah. Because Khrushchev trusted John the 23rd, and so that they were going to broker this, and they were going to start to disassemble these warheads, and the China lobby said no, that's not happening, and so what they did is they turned loose the S-Force, who wanted to kill him anyhow because they thought he was betraying them, over the Cuban Missile Crisis thing. And so they'd actually sent, in defiance of President Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, who ordered them to stand down from those 5 military bases after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Frank Sturgis, who was the CIA liaison out on No Name Key, he launched an actual attack against Cuba and sank a Russian ship in the harbor December of 1962 after the October Missile Crisis.
Can we pull that up, Alessi? 1962 December Cuban attack?
Yeah, and almost nobody found out about it because they were terrified that it was going to be exposed, and that was Frank Sturgis that did it.
Type in Sturgis on the end of attack.
It's going to, if they've got any data at all about it, that's the story. Okay.
Okay. Let's see here.
He used the U.S. Marshals to. That's the one where they went in and burnt out the base. They went out and burnt out the base on No Name Key because they had launched that attack against the ship. It may well still be secret. They may not even be talking about it, but it was extraordinarily important, and that's the thing that triggered the people in the S-Force. They were furious that he went in and burnt out the base. Bobby and John went in and burnt out the base at No Name Key, and then what happened? They arrested them and charged them with a violation of the Neutrality Act, of mounting military operations against a foreign power without authorization. But then he let them go after a few days. And then they started planning in the Everglades, the base there, the Cuban, anti-Castro Cuban base, started organizing a second attack against Cuba in defiance. And Bobby and John sent in a second wave of helicopter gunships, all U.S. Marshals, to burn out the base in the Everglades. And that was E. Howard Hunt was the liaison. So all of a sudden you have Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt, who are the liaison to those Cuban refugee groups. Watergate, those are the two guys that coordinated the Watergate break-in with Traficante's 3 guys who were the gunmen. Okay,
God, it all ties together.
Because Bernard Barker was found is one of the Cubano guys. He had a hole in his jacket, sports jacket pocket. He had a whole sequentially numbered set of $100 bills that was in his pocket, and they tracked them back to the bank down in Mexico. This Banco Internacional into the account of Ogario, and
lawyer.
Mark Felt was getting set to after the burglary. Mark Felt, who was the deputy director of the CIA or deputy director of the FBI, he came in under Pat Gray. Pat Gray got appointed when J. Edgar Hoover died. And Pat Gray, this all becomes critical during the Watergate burglary because the burglary takes place on the night of the 17th. They're arraigned on the 18th. Bob Woodward picks up on the fact that one of the guys that's been arrested is a CIA wiretapping specialist, McCord, and starts trying to track the story, what's going on. On the morning of the 23rd of June, what's his head? His chief of staff. Nixon's chief of staff
wasn't.
No, what's it said?
Can we Google
not,
that?
Not John. It wasn't John.
I
Dean.
can't remember the name.
It was
Robbins. Halderman?
no, Altman.
Alderman.
Yeah. That he comes into the Oval Office and he said, "Mr. President, we got a problem here." That John Dean has just called. Pat Gray has just come over, the head of the FBI, said that they're getting lots and lots of pressure to go investigate this bank down in Mexico City, where these $100 bills have been come from. And he said, and he wants to know if that's going to cause any problem. And Nixon says to Haldeman, he says, "Look." He said, "Get a hold of John Ehrlichman. Get a hold of John, and go on over to the agency right away, and go over there and sit down with Vernon Walters and with Dick Helms, and you tell them right now to call the FBI and tell them to get the hell out of that part of the investigation." And
Totally
Haldeman,
illegal.
And Haldeman says to him, "Well, what am I supposed to tell him to say?" And he said, "You just tell them that if they don't get the FBI out of this part of the investigation, all the Mexico stuff about the Bay of Pigs guys could all come out."
Ooh.
Right? Nobody knows what that means. Nobody knows what that means. But what they're talking about is the base. They're talking about the base in Oaxaca, Mexico, with the training of the Bay of Pigs guys. That those are the guys that were being trained to do the assassination, because he knew that the assassination team could have gotten exposed, because it turns out that's the place where they paid the Watergate burglars out of that account down in Mexico City.
The one down there.
Out of the Ogario account. That's where the $100 bills came from. And that's the account where they were paying for the Triangular Fire Team base. It would have led right back to the assassination. And it turns out that Howard Hughes, E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis were liaisons to the S-Force. Both of those guys. Okay, so that they were not only coordinating the burglary, but they were coordinating the S-Force that was the assassination team that was designed. And as Traficante told us, this is the team that killed the president. And that becomes crucial.
So you're sitting in a
That's
room
right.
in Tampa with your partners, and you're talking to this mob boss.
No, it was Bad Andy was the one talking to him. Bad Andy was the one talking to him, and Traficante sits right there.
But you're sitting there and
tells
you hear
him-
this.
No, he comes back and tells me this.
Oh, okay.
But the bottom line is, there he is saying flat out, so this is the team that killed the president. He said.
How do you react to that?
Well, when I found that Bill Taylor told me, because Bad Andy had come back from interviewing Traficante and was just completely thunderstruck by what he had found out.
Yeah.
And he reached out to Bill Taylor, my investigator, and said, "Look, you two boys are good boys. You ought to leave right now." He said, you don't want to go any farther in this. You both want to leave Bailey's office and don't come back. He said, just leave. And Bill Taylor, my chief investigator, that's not something you tell him, oh, you don't want to know. And so Bill just leaned in on him and got him to tell him what Traficante had told us. And so Bill Taylor and I just said, fuck this, man. We're out of here.
Wait a minute. Let me back up for 1 minute, just because I'm trying to put this all together too. Obviously, it's tied,
yes.
But there's also this weird, like, recent small movement online. There's a movement with every goddamn thing these days, where they try to relitigate Watergate as, oh no, Nixon didn't order anything. It was just the CIA setup because they wanted to get him out of the way, maybe because he knew too much. No. That's bullshit.
It's all bullshit.
Right, because he did order
bullshit.
it.
People don't know anything about what they're talking about.
Right. But the people who did it
did what?
Who actually broke into the building and did Watergate are completely inseparable from the Kennedy situation.
Well, that's right, because three of them were part of the S-Force. I mean, the three, Rolando Martinez, Ricardo Chavez, the guys, and Bernard Barker, are all part of the S-Force. They were part of the 15 people that were gunmen for Santos Traficante. They were part of the force, right? And the reason they were in there is because they couldn't have just anybody going in trying to find out whether Larry O'Brien, who had been the lobbyist for Howard Hughes, had somehow found out about the fact that Hughes was the guy that Richard Nixon had create the team that created the assassination team back in 1960. Remember? So Howard Hughes is the guy that set up the team to kill Castro. They're the ones that killed the president. And Nixon was sure that if it leaked out that he's the one that created the team who end up being the one who killed the president, everybody would have been convinced he was in behind it.
But it's not like they acted on their own. When we're talking about killed the president, there's also, obviously there was the falling out with JFK and Allen Dulles, where he fires Allen Dulles, and then Allen Dulles effectively runs the CIA from his Georgetown, townhouse or whatever. So when you look at it from a high level based on all the wild information who's responsible? S4 killed him.
Yeah.
Right? And we can go into exactly who you think did.
Yeah.
But who's responsible? Like, who said, we're doing this? Who were the guys in charge?
It was the Brown Brothers Harriman people. That they're the ones that would greenlight this. And it was Allen Dulles who was their consigliere. Yeah. He wasn't, the reason he was made the head of the Central Intelligence Agency was because he was legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman. It's not the other way around.
The military-industrial complex, if you will.
I mean, because the CIA was actually created pursuant to a memo that was written by Robert Lovett, who was the senior partner at Brown Brothers Harriman. He wrote it to Truman, advocating that they create a Central Intelligence Agency and that they have this capacity to do this. So that that's who Allen Dulles was. So the green light that got given to the S-Force to go ahead and kill him, which they wanted to do anyhow, came from that group. Okay, and that's partly because it's China lobby, that they have the long-range view that what they're doing is they're going to have to maintain preservation of the nuclear weapons systems in order to confront China, because you can't back China off with any kind of a threat of a traditional land war against them. You have to just threaten them with the nuclear weapons. And that's why they couldn't get rid of them. And that's why Kennedy had to be gotten rid of right away. People keep saying, why didn't they just wait until the election and put in billions of dollars and beat him, in the election? They couldn't wait because he had a whole other year from November of 62 to November or 63 to 64. And he could have undertaken unilateral action as the president, commander-in-chief, to start disassembling the warheads. And that's what he was in the process of thinking of doing.
How do you know so confidently that, what was his name, Lorenzo Morales? Is that it?
Roger Morales.
Roger Morales?
Yeah, David Sanchez Morales is the guy.
David Sanchez Morales was the dude from the grassy knoll.
Yeah, he was the shooter. Everybody knew that he was the shooter. He was the shooter for the team. He was the shooter for the team. He was the
S-Force.
The S-Force. Yeah, that's the guy.
What was his background besides being a Cuban revolutionary?
He was the maximum marksman for them in the Triangular Fire Team base. That's who he was, Morales. And the 15 guys there, we got the names of them. We know who they were.
When did you get the names?
I got the names back in May from Traficante.
In May 73.
73. Yeah.
He gave you all of them.
Yeah, he laid them out just like that.
And they weren't. It's not like they were all physically there that day.
Well,
Right?
actually, they were pretty well deployed in Dallas. Yeah, the whole team was there. It was a full operation. They had Rip Robertson was there. Rip Robertson is their field commander. There's a photograph of Rip Robertson standing right next to the Stennis freeway sign, standing right there. You can see the front whole in the photograph. You can see the whole front bumper of Kennedy's limousine coming in to see. And there's Rip Robertson tipping his hat to the president, 1.2 seconds before the first shot rang out.
Oh my God!
So Rip Robertson is the field commander for those. I know guys who know Rip Robertson. They gone hunting with Rip Robertson. Rip Robertson. They knew exactly who he was, and he was the guy that trained them all. My guy stood right on the deck of the Flying Tiger too, with Rip Robertson and what's his name? What was the guy's name? William D. Pauley, who owned the Flying Tiger too. And when Johnny Martino was just bitching about the Kennedys and what sons of bitches they were and how they betrayed them and all that, and William Pauley turned directly to Johnny Martino at the time. He says, "Don't worry, Johnny, we're going to kill that motherfucker." Said it right in front of my guy. It was Dick Billings. Dick Billings, who was the Miami bureau chief for Life magazine. He was on board the ship because this was the last attempt they were going to make to try to assassinate Castro after they'd been ordered to stand down by John Kennedy and Bobby.
I might be getting this mixed up, but was Jose Rodriguez a part of that S-Force?
Jose Rodriguez. There's Rolando. There's Rolando Martinez. No, not that I know of. No.
What was his tie though to JFK? Jose Rodriguez?
Jose Felix, you were talking about Felix.
I'm sorry, I keep saying
yeah, because I was trying to figure out who you're talking about.
Felix Rodriguez.
Felix Rodriguez was in fact on the S-Force.
Okay.
Felix Rodriguez was on the S-Force. Rafael Chichi Quintero was on the S-Force.
Wait, Rafa Quintero, like the fucking cartel guy?
Yes, Rafael Chichi Quintero.
The Mexican?
No, Rafael Chichi Quintero is a particular guy. He's a longtime Cuban hardcore guy. He was the number 2 to Felix Rodriguez at Ilopango at the weapons transfer for the Contra weapons supply operation. That was Chichi.
Okay.
But Chichi was one of the main shooters, and Chichi was one of the trainers. Chichi, let's see here. Felix Rodriguez ended up being one of the trainers for the Lebanese Phalange assassins under Shackley.
Who were they?
Shackley was handpicked. Theodore Shackley is this really important character that people don't know about. Theodore Shackley is the guy that he was a German and Polish American translator back during World War II. His family fled from Poland before World War II. And he grew up here. He was in the 101st Counterintelligence Corps at the end of World War II. And when Reinhard Gehlen, who was the head of the Waffen-SS, anti-Soviet and anti-Eastern Bloc intelligence, turned himself in to the 101st Counterintelligence Corps in Germany, this fellow was assigned to be his translator, Theodore Shackley. So he was with him when Gehlen came to Fort Hood outside of Washington, D.C., and had a long, protracted negotiation with them about allowing him to head up West German intelligence at the end of World War II. And he brought his entire organization, what they call the Gehlen organization, out of the Third Reich with him into West Germany to head up the anti-Soviet and anti-Eastern Bloc intelligence for NATO for 26 years. And Theodore Shackley was left on as his deputy. Was in the original class of the CIA, 1948. And he was assigned, his first assignment was to go back to Berlin and to work directly under Gehlen. And General Gehlen became the head of the West German intelligence for 26 years. And Shackley was his deputy there at the Berlin operating base of the CIA. And Shackley was brought in was brought in to be the new Miami station chief out of Berlin, out from under Galen, who was this kind of rabid anti-communist guy, fascist, full-scale, Third Reich fascist. And so they brought in Shackley to be the new station chief in Miami to run that JM Wave operation that was the prodigy to the Operation 40. That was Shackley. And Shackley, therefore, had supervisory authority over the S-Force. The S-Force, since it was made up of guys out of Operation 40, those guys that were under the auspices of Theodore Shackley as the CIA station chief in Florida. Okay? Then he went from there, from being the CIA station chief in Florida to being the CIA deputy station chief in Laos, and then the CIA station chief in Laos, where he established the contract with Vang Pao, the opium warlord.
Yep. And
and ended up, eliminating both competitors to Vang Pao in the Golden Triangle by calling in sorties against them, and ended up reducing by 1/3 the total output of opium coming out of the Golden Triangle, but established complete monopoly control over it on behalf of Vang Pao, and then was given a percentage of the profits, which he put over into the Nugan Bank. I've talked to the guys that used to bring suitcases.
This is where it came to the church.
That's just where to get out church security. Yeah, that's the source of the money. That's Theodore Shackley, and Theodore Shackley ended up being handpicked by George Bush Sr. when he became the director of the CIA under Ford. That he brought in Bush to be the CIA director, and Bush brought in Shackley to be the head of covert operations worldwide. And that's Theodore Shackley. He's the one that ran the enterprise. He's the one that created the enterprise. It wasn't Oliver North or any of those people. It was Theodore Shackley. Ran that entire operation, created that entire thing. Set up the Egyptian-American Transport and Service Company, which was the mothership for that whole thing. Set up the off-the-shelf enterprise. Ran all of the Midnight Aviation, all of those corporations that were smuggling the weapons into the Contras and smuggling the cocaine back into the United States. That's all Shackley. Shackley's the one that supervised the October surprise against Carter. When they made the deal with the hostages
with the
to have Hezbollah hold 52 hostages. That was Shackley.
And wait until Reagan.
That's right. That was Shackley's operation. Shackley ran that whole thing, and he was the director of covert ops for George Bush Sr.
God, there's so much there.
Yeah.
All right, let's tie the bow on the Watergate thing, though. This was an amazing loop around with this. But you got involved with the case, like you said, June 21st, shortly after it actually happens. You're investigating it throughout the fall of 1972. Obviously, Woodward and Bernstein start reporting on it over those years. You get the whole Deep Throat thing to come in, and it culminates with Nixon having to resign office in 1970.
But concealing the fact that the bank account was a lot more serious than what they thought it was. That Woodward and Bernstein stopped as soon as they established the fact that the money, part of the money that was at the Banco Internacional that had been translated into the checks into the Bernard Barker's pocket had come from CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. What they didn't do, if they had gone down and pressed on what that bank was all about, they would have found out the assassination team had been trained there.
Do you think they were told to stop?
No, I think what they said is they settled for having this story of the century, that here's the money from CREEP, directly from the Committee to Re-elect the President, in the pocket of the burglars in the thing. That's all they needed. And so they had the story of the century, and so they never dug to really find out what the full story was.
Wow.
And they missed it. There's a famous story that Jacques Vallée tells. The one about the well, we'll get to it, but it's analogous to this. Where they settle for something much less because it seems so good to them. That they settle for it, and then they let the big story go.
And what was your exact, what did you end up doing from a litigation standpoint as it relates to Watergate? You were called in by Philippe Bailey.
What we did is we helped coordinate John. What am I? The fellow who was our client.
Okay.
McCord, James McCord, is the one who wrote the letter to Judge Sirica, blowing the whistle on the Watergate plumbers unit.
Got it.
That's so that he was the one that blew the whistle, because he was furious.
As your client.
Because he thought that he'd been told that they were going in to do the wiretapping, because that they thought that that these people were supporting the anti-Vietnam War people, and that was unpatriotic, and that was illegal for them to be doing that, right? And so he thought that he was doing a good thing, and he thought that he'd been properly dispatched to do the thing, and so he was all indignant, and so he ended up writing a letter to Judge Sirica, blowing the whistle on Richard Nixon and the Watergate plumbers. That's the key that blew the whole case up.
And so you're involved.
So
with
we
that
were
aspect.
involved in that. That's what we were doing.
Okay. And then the last thing on the Kennedy assassination, the cover up after that, where they have the Warren Commission that has fucking Dulles on it,
Yes.
where RFK even asked Dulles to be on it, which is a wild little twist in that whole thing.
Yeah.
And then Arlen Specter, young and excited to get some power, I guess, comes in and invents this magic bullet theory where it comes through and shoots through six fucking different places. Like, why did the American public accept that at the time?
Well, because at that time they still tended to believe what they were told by the government. When the government sets up these full commissions to do things, they were still believing them at that time. That the shock of the Kennedy assassination in '63 was the beginning of the unraveling, of the confidence, the kind of blind confidence that people had in the government at the time. So it was just starting at that point.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.